Welcome to the Safari Jacket for Dolls. This is Marina from Frocks Frolics, and I'm going to teach you how to make this absolutely stunningly beautiful jacket. You have landed in the second part, which shows you step by step how to sew this wonderful jacket. If you want to know everything about the pattern, how it goes together, blah de blah, all the details you need to know before you get started, including cutting out, then please go and watch the first part, which is linked in the description here. If you're watching on my website, you know it's just the video just before. You can find all the videos on the website frocksandfrolics.com, and if you scroll down on the listing for the jacket, you will find all the video content right underneath it, and you don't need to log on or you don't need to sign up for anything. You can just watch all the content before you decide whether this is for you. Just in case you haven't watched the first video, we have 4 pockets here with flaps. You have box pleats. I have put in a placket for the front and a collar which ends before the placket, makes it much easier to sew. It's really cool. You've got a little tie and of course front and back yoke, so it's really safari style. And we've got a tunnel here on the back and on the front, and you can tie it. I have made it color coordinated, or fabric coordinated rather. And this fabric here, I've used in the ties, I've used it in the collar here as well. And you can get this skirt, that's the Scarlet skirt, for free at my website and make it. You can also make it for your girl. It's all the same, and the videos are also on the website. So I hope you enjoy this project immensely. Let's get started with the sewing. The first thing we're going to do is to serge or neaten all the edges, and you can see them listed here. It's basically all the shoulders, sides, and the hem of the sleeve as well. And the serger I'm using here is the 1034D from Brother. I don't think they produce it anymore, but sometimes you can get yourself one of those secondhand maybe. It's a really good simple machine and it's not very expensive. Now we're going to work the pockets and the flaps. And I have chosen a contrast fabric for all of this, and you can see it peeping out here. I don't know if you can, and here, which makes it much lighter. So if you're watching this video and you haven't yet started, think about how thick your fabric is, and then also, are you wearing it with something else? And then you can have a coordinated or contrasting fabric. For me, that was quite important because this fabric is pretty stiff. It's a nice twill. And yeah, so I have a much lighter fabric underneath it, which makes these flaps sit better, and it's much easier to work with. So yeah, let's get them sewn up. The first thing to do is to put the box pleat in. So fold it over with the wrong side of the fabric on the inside. Then 1.5 centimeters over, we mark where the pocket goes. You can put a pin in or just go on the sewing machine just like that on both of them. And we're going to sew that now with a stitch length, maybe 2.5, the regular stitch length. Line it up on your needle plate and, well, sew your box pleat. Don't forget to lock in your stitches. Feed in the next one straight away after. That's a good way to not waste any thread. Now we open out that box pleat and then we're going to iron it. So make sure that it's right and central here. Perfect. Iron on. Lots of steam. Serge the edges of the pockets. Fold in the edges, that centimeter seam allowance. We start with the sides. Then we do the lower edge. And the top edge we can leave as it is. Now compare both that you've done and see that they're the same before you work the flaps. The flaps in my case have this really beautiful printed cotton as its lining, and that makes it much easier to work with. I've already said that because it is lighter. The chino is quite heavy. You want to get the tip right, and the tip here of these flaps is not always that easy to see when you're sewing. So if you're not sure, why don't you mark the tip? So I'm just finding the center here, putting a light dot, and then going up my 1 centimeter seam allowance, and that's it. Now I have got a dot, and I know where I have to turn the needle in the fabric, and I do that on all of my little flaps. So again, take half, mark it, there we go, and then the next one, and that's it. You may also want to mark the corners. You can mark them with a dot or with a cross like I've done here, so you know where to turn. That's not always very apparent if you just started sewing. People that have sewn for a long time, well, they can just do it. But this is a good way to make it easier if you don't exactly know where to turn. So I just go to where my dot is, put the needle down on the fabric, lift the presser foot, and turn. And that way, all the flaps will be exactly the same and have exactly the right size. Look at that, very nice. Now I've done all 4 of them. I'm going to cut them back because they are so small, and I am worried that there might be too much fabric there in the way. When I do flaps for a girl size or an adult size, I may not do that because you can just fold over the edges and that gives you a really nice neat corner. But in this case for dolls, yep, cut them all back and then turn them. Some of you might have a gadget to pull out the corners or push out the corners. I'm using my pin. Come in a little bit sideways, so don't go in right at the tip, because when you lose your grip, you will pull out some of the fibers, and that's not very good. So you don't want to do that. Come in slightly from the side. And if you pull it out too much, you can also move it back in by just forcing it with the needle back into that. So once you've got them all out, oh, there you go. Actually, this needed a little bit more pulling out, pulling and pushing, and there you can see it. I'm just pushing it back in a bit where I've pulled it out too much. And when your flap is nice and even, we can go over to the ironing board and give them all a jolly good press. Before you do, maybe check that they're all the same size. And then I kind of roll out the seam with my fingers a little bit still while I do that, so it comes out really neat. Do that on all 4 of them. And then I'm good to go back to my sewing machine and I'm going to do the top stitching. The top stitching should be with a longer stitch, but because it's doll clothes, I would make it not too big, so maybe 3.5 tops. And keep the same distance to the edge of the fabric. Now on my puff machine, I've got a little red line that I can line the edge up with so that I always got the same distance. See what kind of foot you have, but these plastic feet which are see-through and have lines on them are really good to gauge where you need to sew. So you don't ever have to look at the needle, you just look at that line and line that fabric up with it. And let's have a look. Look how nice that is. Another thing I wanted to say is I'm actually using a contrast color. Now, if you have trouble still keeping your distance, then I wouldn't do that. Use a color that matches really well, and then it won't show if you make a mistake. Now we're going to serge only the upper edge of the wider or larger pocket. And now we can put the box pleat pocket onto the front already. What you want to do is mark the corners here of the pocket, turn your pattern piece over and do it on the other side as well. And now you know exactly where your pocket has to go. So I'm just lining it up both sides and pin them in. And that's it basically. It makes it so easy. If you want to, of course, you can also do a little measure, you know, from the side and from the lower edge, just in case your dots for some reason aren't in the right place. But usually they are. So let me just check here. And on that side and on this side. Yeah, that's all good. Perfect. Maybe do the center as well. Good. We are good to go. So next step, we can now put on our flap, and the flap is slightly larger or at least the same size as the pocket, or at least it should be. So put this on top, really tightly together, those two serging lines. So there is no like seam allowance that you have to keep. You just put them right next to each other. And we can top stitch again, use a stitch length of 3.5. All the way down, turn it. Always have the needle in the fabric when you turn. Move that pin. Look, you can just push in. If something pokes out, just push it in with a pin. Hold it. Go to the corner. Needle down. Oops, I need to go a little bit further. And this is why I like the mechanical machines, because you cannot do that with an electronic machine. Just can't. Just move it with a wheel on the side. Love that. Now I'm also going to sew the flap too. Perfect. There you go. And then it's folded down and we can put a button on. So you can put the button on now or later, it doesn't matter. Let's go and iron this really well first. And then we're going to fold down the flap and give that a jolly good press as well. Wonderful. Put your tailor's clapper on or a weight. Really hold that down so that it will stay down. Look how pristine that is. You do not need to sew across the top here or anything like that. The next step is to get our yokes on. We have a front and a back yoke, and all of these are heavily top stitched, which I think is really important. Now, I want to say just one thing for top stitching before we put these on. Always use a longer stitch length. Never use the same stitch that you use to sew the seams together, okay? That needs to be sort of 2.3, 2.5. But for all your top stitching, use at least 3, if not 3.5. Depends on your sewing machine. Try it out, see which stitch length looks the best, but you need a longer stitch length. Let's get started. First, place your pattern piece over the front piece so you can see through the lines for the little flap. On the other side, of course, it's pretty obvious, but here you can see it through as well. And where they are, just place it on, hold it, and then pin it, and so you have the perfect space. There we go. One pin on one side, one pin on the other side. Now we're taking the yoke and we're placing it on right sides together. There we go. Don't even need to pin this for dolls really, but let's pin it, shall we? There we go. Over to the sewing machine. Seam allowance, as always, is 1 centimeter and included in your pattern, just in case you're wondering. Lock in your stitches. Serge the edge, and we want to have the front underside showing up now because we're going to iron this seam upwards into the yoke, and the pretty side of the serging or overlocking should always be visible. So that's why. Turn up the yoke and press the seam. Now we're going to top stitch the seam. So what you want to do is pull the fabric apart a little with your fingers. We've also pressed it so it's not that pressing, but if you hadn't ironed it first, then of course you could just pull the lower part of the front and the upper part and then top stitch it. Make sure that your stitch length is 3.5 or 3, so it looks really nice. And we're going to do the same on the back yoke. So again, right sides together. Just pin across, or just put a pin at the beginning. That's all we need really. And then go over to the sewing machine and sew the seam together. The other thing with the top stitching is that you can actually use 2 lines of stitching if you like for most of your top stitching. That's also really, really cool, right? I've done that on the pink jacket that's blended in here, but on this one, I've just done 1 line. Then 1 centimeter seam allowance, lock in your stitches at the end. Serge, and again we have the underside of the back facing upwards so that when we iron it up, the pretty side is visible, right? And once I've done that, I go back to the sewing machine and I can now top stitch it. Just like that, either 1 line or 2 lines. Stitch length up, mine is just about 3. And I line it up with that red marking on my presser foot again that we've talked about before. So the edge of the seam lies in line with that. And it looks perfect. Look at that. Really, really nice. Now we're doing the shoulder seams, and I always like to put all my fabric pieces in front of me, right side facing up, and then flip over the fronts and pin the shoulders, so that you know exactly which one is right. Sometimes you put them in the wrong way. I mean, I have done that where the neckline was facing the wrong way. And if you work it like that, that really can't happen. So now we're going to iron the seams apart, nice and flat. And we are also top stitching those shoulder seams. And I'm just going to turn and go 2 stitches over and then come down the other side. And of course I do the same on the other side as well. That looks really great, doesn't it? Really is nice. Now we're going to sew or prepare the collar, and the collar is quite clever for this one because it's only sewn on to the front and the placket goes on afterwards. That makes it a lot easier to sew than if you had a collar that went all the way to the front and the placket went on first, right? And that's the reason why we do this first. So much easier. So when you sew the collar, only close the top. I have seen people, they just go straight down because they imagine that it's going all the way to the front. It's not. It's just that part. We do the placket later. We are only going to pin the upper edge, and then we're going to sew that seam. It's, as always, a 1 centimeter seam allowance. So line up the edge of the fabric with a marking on the needle plate for 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch. Check that they're both the same, worthwhile checking, because otherwise the collar might be a little bit too tall or too small. The sides have to be the same. Press the seam flat first and then press the seam open. That's a really good habit to get into, even though for the shoulder seams I did not do that just before, but it is much, much better to do it. Now we're going to turn down the fabric, and I'm rolling it between my fingers a little bit so that none of it is visible from the upper side. Now we can put the collar on, and I like to work from the inside to the outside. So I'm placing the center back of the lining, or the under collar if you will, on the center back of the neckline, and then I work my way around. Now, because the neckline is round and the collar is fairly straight, it always feels like there is too much collar, but there isn't. It's just that where the seam is, it fits perfect. And then as you go up though, the neckline becomes smaller, so you always have that little bit of collar fabric that feels like there's too much there, but there isn't. Now when you come to the fronts on both sides, make sure that they line up straight, and then you fit in the rest of the collar, and it should fit in really, really well. I had no trouble getting this on. In fact, I went, well done, Marina. It's not bad at all. And once it's in, over to the sewing machine, and let's get that collar on. There we go. 1 centimeter seam allowance, or you could do foot width as well if that's easier for you. I think if you watch me here, I think I'm doing foot width. Doesn't really matter, because as long as I do it all the way around the same, it'll fit. Make sure that the rough edges are edge to edge. Keep smoothing out underneath so you don't have any of the seams folding over or little pleats. Easily happens. And all the way to the end, lock in your stitches, and we are done. Back to the ironing board, and we're now going to iron this seam into the collar. And you can see blended in all these beautiful little dolls as well, and the clothing they are wearing is designed by yours truly, and you can get it at frocksandfrolics.com from the doll collection. Now, next step, we're going to turn in the collar, and that's why I like to roll it from the inside to the outside, because when I top stitch it, it doesn't matter whether I catch underneath because it's already sewn to. So I find that easier, but of course you could also work the other way around, no trouble at all. In the front, make sure that it's straight. It's very easy to turn in more of the fabric at this point, and then it won't look very nice. So make sure that it's really nice and flat and straight. Over to the other side. It's looking good, really. I actually really love this little jacket. I think whoever gets this little jacket for their little doll is going to really love it. Oh, and we've got blended in another collection item here that I really love is the Audrey Capri pants on the left-hand side. You want to try those, they're great. When everything lines up and you're done and you think this is perfect, then we are going to top stitch it all the way around. Generally speaking, for a collar, don't start at the front, always start somewhere in the middle, at the back where nobody can see it. And of course, afterwards I thought, well, the front is open, why did I start in the center? Obviously autopilot. So in the instructions, that's slightly different. I actually say, you know, you can start at the beginning, do not start at the center back. You don't need to do that. But generally speaking, for collars, which go to the very front of the garment, that would be the way to do it. So I'm sorry, everyone. I was on autopilot. I'm sure you have some tales that you could tell as well about how you do that sort of thing. It's just like you go afterwards and you think, what was I thinking? Anyway, top stitch it really neatly. That's the point of this. And we're almost at the front. Beautiful. And there's the Audrey Capris on their own as well. Again, they're really nice. And the t-shirt that she's wearing comes with a pin-tuck jeans, which is out fairly new as well. We'll try that. You can make that in all manner of fabrics. You can make it for the summer or winter item, whatever takes your fancy. Right, so now I'm locking in my stitches at the center back, And my collar is in. Super simple. Now we're going to do the sleeves and put them in. The first thing to do is to add a gathering thread into the sleeve head, because we can then pull that and reduce the width on the outside of that sleeve so that it will fit in really well. You need the longest stitch available on your sewing machine, and you go all the way around the sleeve head. But before we carry on with that, we're going to just quickly do the hem. So turn up the hem 2 centimeters and iron it in. And the inch measurements, of course, are in your instructions as well. I just don't mention them because I get them wrong so many times. Always have to look it up. It's like inches is not my thing, but they are in the instructions. So now we're top stitching this, and so right through the serging line. Pull the bobbin thread, and I'm also putting a pin in here and wrapping the thread around in a figure of 8 so the thread can't go anywhere. Maybe a bit overkill, but still. And once you have reduced the width on the outside, you steam that extra fabric in, and you can see how lovely that curves around. And what that does is it makes the sleeve edge slightly smaller, and so it will fit better into the armhole, but the sleeve goes wider, and that's why the sleeve always feels like you have too much fabric there. Same as with the collar that we've just done, same kind of stuff happens there. So by steaming it in, it works fabulously. Make sure that you line up the marking of the sleeve with the shoulder, and then just move it round to the front. Now, where you have the side seam of your sleeve and of your main part of the jacket, it wants to be sitting straight on top of each other, really, really straight. Please be careful with that. That is a good thing to know for any of your sewing. Now it's time to sew it in because it's kind of looking very, very good. And I'm going to sew directly on this gather thread that I pulled a little bit. Make sure that underneath it's all flat. Keep straightening it out underneath if you think that you might catch a seam allowance that will fold over. You need to just watch out a little bit. Take your time, and then also don't take the pins out unless you're almost on top of them. And then use the pin to hold the fabric in place, because what it likes to do is to push over the shoulder so the sleeve head becomes smaller, and you don't want that. You need that little bit of volume of the sleeve in there, otherwise it will look too tight. So make sure that the rough edges sit right on top of each other. And now look how beautiful that is. It's really nice. Perfect. I'm just checking that nothing has caught or folded over, and it's all good. So I can go to the overlocker and start overlocking. This time we're not paying any attention to which is the pretty side and which is not. You overlock your sleeves with the underside of the sleeve facing upwards. And that's because if you do it the other way around, you forever have a seam that would kind of stand up a little bit into the air. Yes, could you steam it back in? But I wouldn't do that because the sleeve has 2 layers of fabric, and it will never look quite right. So here the rule does not apply. Right, perfect. You got the sleeve in. And now we're going to close the side seams. And whenever we're closing the side seams on a doll, we're always doing the sleeve seam and the body seam in one go. That's super important for all your doll's clothing. Do not try to close side seams first because you're on autopilot and then put the sleeve in. It's literally too small. You can't do it. So let me show you how this works. Place the hem of the front and the back together and the sleeve ends on top of each other, we're always pinning from the hem, and then we're working our way towards the sleeve. Pin the underarm as well. And then where we get to the sleeve needs to be pinned about 2 millimeters lower than the end, because as we move along and sew it, when we move the needle out, the fabric will push and they will sit perfectly on top of each other. And that's a really, really good tip for anyone that has trouble with that and always has one side sticking over the other. Do the same on the other side and you're ready to move over to the sewing machine and close the seam. Again, 1 centimeter seam allowance. You know it by now, don't you? And we're going around. Move the pins out as you get to them. Don't move them out too early. And now watch what happens here when I move my pin out. See how the fabric pushes towards the front and all of a sudden it's perfect on top of each other. This is such a good tip. Now we're going to iron the seams apart, and I'm using my sleeve ironing board for that on both sides. And then I'm going to also iron the sleeve, and because it does not fit onto the ironing board, if you have a sleeve ironing board like mine here, you can just turn it on the side and use the edge of that. So I open out my sleeve, place it on, and it will not iron a crease into the edges. It will just iron the seam. So that's a neat little trick as well. There's a whole manner of things that you have learned during this, I'm sure. There we go. Now, the one thing that you don't have to do, but because I used to be a couture tailor and I made wedding dresses, and I'm really a little bit, I don't want to use the word, but I always have to have it very, very tidy. And so what I did here was sew down my seam allowances so they're not visible and it'll be like perfect. Is it necessary for a doll? Probably not, but I do think that it does look very, very nice and it makes a difference. And then I also repeated this process, sewing the seam to the sleeve seam allowance, because it's all closed in one. Very often you get a bit of a knobbly bit under the arm. You have that also when you do it for grown-ups or for your kids. Another good tip is to also sew them down there. So I'm doing that here as well, so that everything sits really, really well. And there we go. We are finished with that. We can move on to the hem. Now the hem needs to be serged before it's turned up. So go back to your overlocker or serger. And this time we're going to neaten the edge from the top as per usual and go all the way to the end. Now we're going to turn up the hem. It's 1.5 centimeters. So you can either pin that or just do what I do. I took the pins out. I went, oh no, I don't like this. I don't even measure it anymore, as you can see. Once you've sewn for a very long time, like me, it's like well over 30 years, you just know where that measurement is. You're just flying by the seat of your pants at some stage, but you can pin it all if you like. Now when we're top stitching this, it's very close to the pocket there, so I've measured this out exactly. It will just go past it. So we are going to sew from the upper side of the fabric, because the stitch formation on the underside often is not as nice as from the upper side. So that's why we're doing it. Now you want to line it up just under the 1.5 centimeter. You want to also not sew into your pocket there. That's really important. So a little bit lower, so you definitely catch it on the other side. Great, that looks really nice. And you want to end up right in that serging line. Now we're going to put the placket on here to the front. What I'm doing here differently to what you probably normally see is we're sewing this placket to the underside first, rolling it to the front and then tucking it in. That makes it easier to sew down here and catch it. However, it also looks a little bit messier and is maybe, I don't know, is it really easier? This is up to you how you do it. You can sew the placket to the front, turn it to the back, pin it, and then top stitch it from the outside, or sew it from the inside, roll it to the outside, tuck the seam allowance in, and then top stitch from that side. It both has its advantages and disadvantages. So for me, this was easier, but you may find that if you can't fold this properly, that it looks a little bit messy. And in that case, if you are a complete beginner, maybe you should sew it to the front first, to the outside, roll it in, and then pin it, and maybe even hand stitch it. But that's up to you. See how you go. Place the right side of the placket against the underside of the front of the jacket. Leave a centimeter standing at the lower end and pin up. When you get to the top, you might find the placket actually has a little bit more than a centimeter left standing over the edge, and that's good like that because I made it a little bit longer just in case. You can sew it down foot width or a centimeter, that doesn't really matter too much at this point, all the way down. And next step is, of course, to iron it really neatly, as you do. Looking good though. Iron the seam into the placket. I do it again from the other side as well. Oof, that looks really good. Turn up one side. You can do a centimeter or slightly less. It's not really important, to be honest, because we are going to fold it back on itself in a minute, and therefore, you know, wherever that is, that width that determines the placket is going to be fine. But what I found out afterwards is that if you line up your crease with a folded line, it's actually just a millimeter or two too short. So what I would suggest that you do to get it absolutely perfect is to put that crease right underneath the other fold and not next to it, right? So that you don't have to do that, because my ironed in fold was not quite in the right position for some reason. That's never happened before, but I think it's something I've learned as well. So if they line up not next to each other, but on top of each other, you'll have no trouble when we're going to come and turn that seam allowance in. Now I'm sewing across here, and I need to do that really straight. I found that on the first jacket I made, where I kind of just sewed across it, and I got some really ugly noses there, and I had to redo it once. So make sure that you line up the edge of the fabric with the lines on your stitch plate. That would go, and then it'll come out perfect. So now we're going to cut back the seam allowances. And I'm also cutting back the whole lot here a little bit as well. That is the part only of the jacket front, not the placket. So we've got it slightly layered, and that makes it flatter overall, and it's then nicer, basically. Now put in your thumb, and then with your pointer finger, hold it and push it through with your nail a bit. And you can now lift out slightly sideways the corner here. I do the same on the other side. It's really very simple. And check that the length is the same. That is real important here, I have to tell you, because it's not nice once you've got it all in and you think, oh no, they're not the same. Does it matter for a door? Probably not, but it's always better to do it right, right? So now turn in that seam allowance And you'll see now that where I do it, it's actually a wee bit too short, and I had to go that 1 or 2 millimeters higher up to cover my stitching line. So when you put your placket on, you of course won't do that because you won't line up the crease exactly next to each other with a folded inseam allowance, but you will put that crease slightly under so it sits in the perfect position to turn it round, and you won't have to do this. I mean, it's not really that bad either, but you know, perfection is what we aim for, I think. So it's just minimal, absolutely minimal. Just make sure that you cover that stitching line. And if you think this is too much of a struggle here, because I think that's the only thing about this jacket which may cause a beginner to go, oh no, I don't know, this is a bit hard, then put the placket to the outside first, roll it to the inside, and then pin this on the inside and just slip stitch it by hand, and that will be absolutely perfect. It's a little bit more work, but yeah, for a beginner, maybe that's the better way to do it. I'm quite happy with it here. I probably do it like this all the time. But yeah, there you go. There's 2 options here, and you just have to find the one that's right for you. And now we're going to top stitch all the way around. Always start somewhere in the center, never at the beginning or end. Use your little red line if you have a puff machine on your see-through presser foot. That works very well for me, so that you always have the same distance. Over, always have the needle down when you turn. There you go. And back down. Move the pins out so you don't get ugly loops underneath it. That would be a disaster. And do that all the way to the end. Then we do the same again. We have the needle down when we get to the corner. Now, needle down, turn again. And you may have to push it a little bit. It actually worked fine on my machine, but sometimes it doesn't transport very well. You can help yourself put a double thread through the corner, and then you can pull on that thread a little bit, and that helps you out if your machine doesn't transport very well. Give it a very good press. And we're nearly done. I'm actually loving this. So cute. The next step now is to do the tie. And to turn the tie, I'm using a loop turner, which is ingenious. All you have to do is poke this through your tunnel, and there is a little hook here. I don't know if you can see it. That goes into the fabric, and then we close the hook and pull it through. The one thing you need to watch out for when you do that is that you always have tension. So when you're pulling it over, if you lose the tension, this can become open, and then, you know, you lose your grip on it, and it's half turned and you go, oh no. So have a good amount of tension on here all the time when you pull. This is a great gadget. You can get that also from my Amazon store, and the link for that is in the description as well. So let's do this tie. Fold the tie lengthways in half. You can pin it just at the top, really. You don't need to pin this. Go over to your sewing machine, line up the folded fabric edge with the presser foot. That should give you a width of about 0.8 of a centimeter. So it's just under 3/8 of an inch. Go all the way to the end. And blended in here is the safari jacket in the pink, in linen, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. I can only encourage you to try this jacket. It isn't that hard, really. Now I'm using my loop turner. Yes, it's in action. You can see the little hook there, and I'm pushing it all the way through to the other end. And then I take the little hook. There it is, and I'm going to hook that into my fabric. So fold it down and then push it up so that it sits securely in. And then we just pull the fabric over the loop turner. Keep the tension. Like I said, if you lose the tension and you're halfway through, that is really annoying because you're never going to get it out. So you have to start over. So keep that tension there until it comes out on the other side. And once it does, you go, phew, I'm through. And you can just unhook your loop turner, pull the end through, and you're done. Next step is to just iron out the seam. So you roll it between your fingers and then iron from one end to the other. Use a lot of steam so it's nice and pristine. Now we're going to sew the tunnel. And in your instructions here, you will find that I'll mark both lines for the top and the bottom of the tunnel. Now, guess what? You really just need to mark, of course, the lower edge, because then, you know, you do put your tunnel on there. What else is it going to do? It can't go anywhere else. So when you mark it from the front. The lower edge is all you need. You could, of course, use the upper edge, but I would do the lower edge all the way around, and that's it. Now the distance from the front should be the same on both sides. So how I work this, and it's also the same in your instructions and this little video, is to mark the back here and line it up with the back of the back piece. And then you go from there to the front. Wherever that ends, that's where it needs to go. It doesn't matter if it's like 3 millimeters further to the front or to the back, as long as they're both the same on both sides. The tunnel ends are folded over first. That's so that your safety pin doesn't get stuck in it when you thread through your tie, basically. You can top stitch that down now, or you can wait until later. I waited until later. So I'm just going to put a crease in the center here. I'm not really ironing this. It's a very, very light line I want, so I know how far to turn up either side. So now I have that line. I can turn the seam allowance up so that there is a gap between the center line and this. Because if you don't, it gets a little bit thick. There we go. I'll do the same on the other side. It's basically like you're doing bias binding. And honestly, I burnt my fingers on this so much. You can see your fingers moving out of the way real quick. Oh, that was, yeah, a bit painful. So now we turn it so it sits with the right side facing upwards. We're sewing across both ends, and now the tie can go through and it will never sort of be bulky or pushed to the outside. It's like nicely done. To put the tunnel on, all you have to do is mark a little bit away from the front, a little bit further in from the pocket, 6 centimeters up. That is 2.6 inches. Just mark it. It doesn't matter whether it stops there at that point or not. You just need to mark those 6 centimeters all the way around to the front. A little bit less than the front of the pocket line is usually okay. And we're going to start putting this on from the center back, so it doesn't really matter if you measure out the front. Now you want to take your tunnel and you want to mark the center of the tunnel. And I'm going to put a little mark there with my textile marker. Could also put a pin or nothing because you can actually see it. But for a video, it's always better if it's a little bit easier to see. So textile marker it is. There we go. And now I can line up my tunnel and the center back of the safari jacket and move it all the way to the front. Super simple. That's nice. So cute. It's so simple. I will really encourage you to make this jacket, truly. It does take time. It's not one of those things you can do in like 5 minutes. There are things that I do that are really simple, like the pin tuck jeans. That is really quick to sew, and the t-shirt, of course. But a jacket is not, but you can learn so much with it. And I do think that if you can make this, you can make it for a girl. And here, if it's not quite perfect, doesn't really matter. It's for a doll. I think that your girl will be really happy with it either way. Now pull the sleeves through, because actually it makes it easier. That was so in the way. So I'm pulling those through. And now I'm top stitching again, and I use that line that's on my presser foot. Do not look at your needle. That's rule number 1 anyway. Don't look at the needle. Just look at where you line up your fabric. It's always the same. And that's the top edge done. And I do the same on the lower edge, of course, turn it round and go down there again. And if you're not sure that you can get it absolutely perfect, then just don't use a contrast thread. I don't think you will be seeing it at all if it's like kind of melting into the fabric. And if you're like super duper tidy, you can also use top stitching thread, so it's a little bit thicker. That would make it perfect. I'm always a little bit scared of the top stitching thread because it very often does loops underneath it. So you can do that, and I have done it, but you do need to then put the tension up really high. Put the tie in your safety pin and thread it all the way through to the other end. And the word end is a kind of synonymous here for we actually are at the end. Just pull it through, put a knot in either side of your little tie, and that's it. All you have to do now is to put on some buttons or cam snaps. How did you get on? Do you think you're going to make it? I hope you do. Don't forget, get the pattern from frocksandfrolics.com, get the scarlet for free, and make this stunning outfit. It goes really well together. So until the next project, me and the little doll are going to say goodbye. Bye for now.
Hi, I'm your new friend. I love my new jacket.